Nora Castillo signed the divorce papers on a Thursday morning in February, sitting in a lawyer's office that smelled of carpet cleaner and old coffee, using a pen the receptionist had to hunt for in 3 different drawers before finding one that worked. She signed her name in 4 places. She handed the pen back. She walked out into a gray February morning with $31 in her checking account, a 7-year-old daughter named Lily waiting at her sister's apartment across town, and the particular hollow feeling of a person who has just watched the structure of their life formally dismantled and is standing in the rubble, trying to remember which direction is forward. She was 36 years old. She had been married for 8 years to a man named Derek, who was not a bad person in any dramatic or obvious way, and who had become, over the 8 years, so thoroughly unsuited to the life they had built together that the end had arrived not as a crisis, but as a long, slow drainage, like water leaving a tub, until one morning she had woken up and realized the tub was empty and had been empty for some time. Derek had not left her destitute. That needed to be said because it was true. The divorce had been technically equitable, the assets divided according to what they both had, which was not much after 8 years of 2 modest incomes and a daughter, and a rental they had always meant to leave for something they owned and had never quite managed to. She had walked away with enough to cover 3 months of rent if she was careful, and nothing beyond that. No savings, no property, no fallback of any kind beyond her own ability to work, which she had, and her sister Paula's guest room, which Paula had offered without being asked, and which Nora was using with the complicated gratitude of someone who needed help and finds it difficult to need things. She had a job, accounts receivable, at a small manufacturing firm, a position she had held for 4 years and that paid adequately for a person living alone and inadequately for a person raising a child. She had Lily, who was 7 and fierce, and had her grandmother's laugh and a quality of resilience that Nora sometimes found heartbreaking, because no 7-year-old should need to be resilient, and yet here they were. She had Paula's guest room, which had a pull-out sofa for Lily and a folding cot for Nora, and a window that looked out at the building across the alley and let in the light between 8 and 10 in the morning before the angle changed. What she did not have was any clear idea of what came after the 3 months. The call from the lawyer's office in Caldwell came 6 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, while Nora was making pasta in Paula's kitchen, and Lily was at the table doing homework, with the focused intensity she brought to arithmetic and the conspicuous lack of it she brought to everything else. The lawyer's name was Martin Cross, and he had a careful telephone manner that Nora initially interpreted as reluctance to deliver bad news. He told her that her grandmother, Elena Castillo, had passed away 3 weeks earlier, at the age of 82, at the care facility in Caldwell, where she had lived for the past 4 years. Nora put the wooden spoon down on the counter. She had known her grandmother was in a care facility. She had not known Elena had passed. The family was scattered and complicated, in the way that families became after enough years of distance and occasional friction, and the slow attrition of connection that happened when no one made the sustained effort to prevent it. Nora had spoken to Elena twice in the past year, both times briefly, both times leaving the call with the intention to call again sooner next time, and then not doing it. She felt the familiar mixture of grief and guilt that came with losing someone you had meant to know better. Martin Cross gave her a moment and then continued. Elena had left a will. It was a simple document, he said, because Elena's estate was simple. The care facility fees had consumed most of what she had. What remained was a single asset, a mountain cabin in the hills outside Caldwell, approximately 90 minutes northeast of where Nora was currently standing. The cabin had been in Elena's possession for 30 years, purchased when she was in her early 50s from a family who had used it as a hunting property and had decided to sell. It sat on 1.5 acres of land, accessed by a Forest Service road that was passable in good weather and uncertain in bad. He said the property had been assessed for tax purposes at a nominal value. The cabin had not been properly maintained in the 4 years since Elena had moved to the care facility. There were unpaid property taxes of modest amount that would need to be resolved. He wanted to be transparent about all of this before he asked whether Nora wished to accept the inheritance. Nora asked how nominal the assessment was. Martin Cross said the most recent tax record showed an assessed value of $800 for the structure, with the land valued separately at a figure that reflected its remote location and the access limitations. Nora looked at Lily at the kitchen table, who had looked up from her homework when her mother stopped stirring the pasta, and was now watching her with the quiet, observational attention of a child who had learned to read the room. She asked Martin Cross if she could have a few days before she gave him an answer. He said, of course. She hung up the phone and finished making the pasta, and said nothing to Lily about the call that evening, because she did not yet know what to say. She lay awake on the folding cot that night and thought about Elena. Not the Elena of the last few years, elderly and distant, and reduced by time to brief phone calls and a Christmas card. The Elena of Nora's childhood, who had been the most vivid person in any room she occupied, who had cooked food that people talked about for days afterward, who had a laugh that arrived without warning and filled whatever space it was in, who had told Nora stories about the mountains and the land and the particular quality of silence that existed in high places that Nora had never fully understood as a child, but had held on to anyway, the way you hold on to things that are given to you by people whose understanding exceeds your current capacity to receive it. She thought about $31 and 3 months and an alley view from a guest room window. She called Martin Cross in the morning and said she was accepting. She drove up on a Saturday 2 weeks later with Lily in the passenger seat and a bag in the trunk with 2 days of supplies and her toolkit, which was modest but honest, assembled over years of being a person who fixed things herself because the alternative was paying someone else to do it. The Forest Service road was as advertised, passable in the dry February conditions, but demanding in the way that roads demanded things when they had been built for function rather than comfort. The trees closed in on both sides as they climbed, pine and fir growing dense and tall, the sky visible in a narrowing strip above the road that gave the ascent the quality of moving through something rather than across it. Lily had been quiet for most of the drive, in the way she was quiet when she was processing rather than disengaged. She was looking out the window with her grandmother's eyes, which was something Nora noticed every time the light was right, and which she had stopped trying to find, not overwhelming. The cabin appeared at the end of a short clearing where the road widened into a rough parking area of compacted earth and pine needles. It was small, smaller than Nora had pictured from Martin Cross's description. A single-story structure of rough timber and stone with a covered porch along the front face and a stone chimney on the right end that rose above the roofline with the authority of something built by someone who understood that the chimney was the most important part. The roof had moss on it in several places and was missing material in a section above the back left corner. The porch railing had given way on the left side and was resting against the porch post at a tired angle. 2 of the 4 porch steps were intact. One was cracked, and one was missing entirely, replaced by a flat stone that had been placed there by someone who understood the problem and had a stone available. Lily got out of the car and stood in the clearing and looked at it. She said it looked like something from a story. Nora said it looked like a lot of work. Lily said those could both be true. They went inside. The interior was one main room with a small kitchen area along the back wall and a sleeping loft accessed by a ladder on the right side. A cast-iron wood stove sat in the corner, with the chimney running through the wall into the stone chimney outside. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books that had not been removed, Elena's books, paperback novels and a field guide to mountain plants, and a collection of notebooks with dates written on their spines, covering a span of nearly 30 years. Nora stood in the middle of the main room and breathed it in. It smelled of old wood and cold ash, and the particular closed-air quality of a place that had been sealed for 4 years. It also smelled, underneath all of that, of something she could not immediately name, but that arrived in her chest as recognition rather than information. A smell that belonged to a specific quality of memory rather than a specific content of it. Elena. Not Elena herself, but something that Elena had been part of. The mountains and the silence and the particular quality of being in a place that was very far from the things that pressed on you. Lily had gone directly to the shelf of notebooks. She was standing in front of them with her hands behind her back, in the position she adopted when she was looking at something she wanted to touch, but had not yet decided she was allowed to. Nora said she could look at them. Lily pulled the first notebook from the shelf, the one with the earliest date, and opened it carefully on the table. Elena's handwriting covered the pages in Spanish, small and precise, filling the lines completely. Lily could read some Spanish. Nora had made sure of that, but not fluently enough for this, and she turned the pages with the careful attention of someone reading a language through its shape rather than its meaning, following the rhythm of it without the content. Then she stopped turning. She looked at the page she had stopped on for a moment. Then she looked at Nora. She said that this page was different. Nora came and looked. The page was different. The handwriting was the same, but the content was not the continuation of whatever the preceding pages contained. It was a list, or something organized like a list, entries down the left side of the page, each followed by a notation or measurement of some kind. And beside the list, filling the right side of the page in a careful hand, was a small hand-drawn diagram. It looked like a floor plan, not of the cabin as it currently existed. The dimensions were different. There was a section indicated in the diagram that had no corresponding feature in the room they were standing in. A rectangular space marked off from the main room on the north side, which was the wall behind the wood stove. Lily said very quietly that it looked like there was a room that wasn't there. Nora spent the rest of that first day measuring, not dramatically, not with the urgency of someone who had convinced themselves of something and needed to confirm it immediately. With the methodical patience she brought to things that required accuracy, measuring the interior dimensions of the main room and comparing them with the exterior dimensions she measured from outside, walking the perimeter of the cabin with her tape measure and writing each figure in her notebook. The numbers did not match. The north wall, the one behind the wood stove, presented 42 inches more of exterior than interior measurement. She checked it twice. She checked it a third time from a different starting point. The discrepancy held. Lily was watching from the table with her homework open in front of her, the covers she used when she wanted to observe something without appearing to be observing it. A habit so transparently inherited from Nora herself that Nora found it difficult to object to. She pressed her hands flat against the wall behind the wood stove and moved along it slowly. The timber was old and close-fitted in the style of the original construction, no different from the other walls to look at. She knocked along its surface, listening. Approximately 2/3 of the way along the wall, the sound changed. Not dramatically, not in the obvious way that hollow spaces announce themselves in stories. Just a subtle shift in resonance, a fractional difference in the quality of the knock that would have meant nothing to someone who was not listening for it, and meant everything to someone who was. Lily had put the homework down. Nora ran her hands along the wall at the change point. The timber planks were fitted tightly, but she could feel, once she was looking for it, a seam that ran vertically, where the junction was slightly different from the surrounding construction. Not a gap, a join, the kind of join that existed where something was made to open rather than simply to stand. She found the mechanism 20 minutes later. Not a handle or a latch in any conventional sense, but a specific plank, third from the bottom at the join point, that when pressed at its right end rather than its center, moved inward a 1/4 inch and released something that produced a sound very like a breath, a small release of pressure differential between the main room and whatever was on the other side. The section of wall swung inward. It moved on a pivot mechanism rather than hinges, rotating around a central vertical axis, so that pressing one side caused the other to swing out into the room. It was smooth in its operation in a way that suggested it had been engineered rather than improvised, built with the precision of a person who understood what they were making and had made it to last. The space beyond was dark. Nora reached back to her bag and found the torch she always carried and clicked it on. It was a room, small, perhaps 8 feet by 6, with a ceiling that matched the main room and walls of the same close-fitted timber. Dry, which was the first thing she noticed, because 4 years of cabin vacancy and a compromised roof had introduced moisture into the main room that was evidenced by the smell and the surface condition of certain areas. But this room was dry in the way a room was dry when it had been sealed against the outside in a way the main room had not. There were shelves on 3 walls, built-in shelves of the same timber as the walls, fitted with the same quality of care as the rest of the hidden room. And on the shelves were things, boxes, some of timber, small and fitted with simple latches, some of tin, the kind that had been manufactured in a specific era for a specific purpose, and that accumulated value for their age as much as their content. And arranged among the boxes, wrapped in cloth that had kept its integrity in the sealed, dry space, objects whose shapes Nora could see through the cloth without yet understanding them. Lily was behind her at the entrance to the hidden room, not pushing in but present, her breathing audible in the silence. Nora stepped inside. She lifted the cloth from the nearest wrapped object and held it in the torchlight. It was a piece of pottery, a small vessel, rounded, with a surface that bore the marks of hand shaping and the coloring of a specific technique that Nora could not immediately name, but that she recognized in the way you recognize things, you had encountered in books or museums, recognizing the category without the specific knowledge. It was old in a way that was immediately apparent in its weight and its surface and its presence, the way genuinely old things had a presence that reproductions did not. She set it very carefully back on the shelf. She opened the nearest timber box. Inside, in a nest of old cloth that had functioned as packing, were 3 more pieces, smaller than the first, similarly made, similarly old, intact, undamaged. She opened a second box, documents, a collection of papers, some handwritten, some printed, in Spanish, and in what she thought was an older form of Spanish that she could read partially and not fully. She could read enough to understand that several of the pages were records, provenance records, acquisition records, a handwritten inventory in Elena's handwriting that covered 4 pages and listed items with descriptions and dates, and in several cases notations she did not understand, but that appeared to be assessments of some kind. She sat on the floor of the hidden room with the torch and Elena's inventory and read it slowly, running her finger along the handwriting, line by line, using what Spanish she had and working around what she did not. The inventory listed 47 items. The earliest acquisition date in the list was 1962. The most recent was 2003, the year before Elena had stopped coming to the cabin as frequently, the years when her health had begun to make the mountain road more difficult. The descriptions were careful and specific, the kind of descriptions a person wrote when they understood what they were describing and wanted the record to be accurate rather than approximate. Nora read the inventory through to the end. Then she sat in the dry, sealed room her grandmother had built behind a hidden wall in a mountain cabin and looked at the shelves and understood with a slowly arriving clarity that was entirely different from the shocked, sudden realizations of stories that Elena had spent 40 years of her life quietly acquiring something that nobody in the family had known she was acquiring. Pre-Columbian ceramics and artifacts, collected through the kinds of connections and relationships that a woman of Elena's generation and background could develop over a lifetime of knowing the right people and paying attention to what moved through certain markets in certain eras, before those markets changed and the items in them became something different entirely, not in themselves, but in what the world was willing to pay for them. 47 items, cataloged by a woman with a precise hand and a genuine understanding of what she had. Preserved in a sealed, dry room behind a wall that looked like every other wall from the outside. Lily said from the doorway that she had been reading over Nora's shoulder. Nora looked up. Lily said that her Spanish was not good enough for all of it, but that she had understood the numbers in the right-hand column of the inventory. Nora looked back at the inventory. She had understood the numbers too. She had understood them and had not yet allowed herself to finish the thought they were leading to. In the same way, you did not look directly at something very bright because you needed to approach it at an angle first. She allowed herself to finish the thought. 47 items, cataloged values in the right-hand column, written in Elena's hand in figures that reflected what Elena had understood them to be worth at the time of writing. The inventory was undated, but the paper and ink suggested it was not recent. The market for what was on these shelves had not decreased in the intervening years. She looked at Lily in the doorway. Lily said that they should probably call someone who knew about this kind of thing. Nora said yes, they should. She stood up carefully, holding the inventory. She looked around the room that Elena had built and filled and sealed and left, without explanation, for whoever came after her. No note, no letter, no instruction beyond the inventory itself, which was its own form of instruction. The careful record of a woman who had understood what she had and had trusted that the right person would come and read it and know what to do. She thought about Elena's laugh filling whatever room it was in. She thought about stories about mountains and silence that a child had held on to without fully understanding. She thought about $31 and a folding cot and 3 months, and the particular hollow feeling of standing in rubble, trying to find the direction forward. She looked at her daughter in the doorway of the hidden room, 11 years old, with her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's quality of paying attention to things other people walked past. Lily had found the notebooks. Lily had turned to the page with the floor plan. Lily had said it looks like there was a room that wasn't there. And she had been right about that, in a way that was going to take a long time to fully understand. Nora folded the inventory carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. She said they would go back to town and find a hotel for the night, and in the morning she would call Martin Cross and ask him for the name of someone who handled this kind of thing properly. Lily said, "Okay." Then she looked at the shelves one more time. She said she thought great-grandmother Elena must have been a very interesting person. Nora said she thought so too. She said she was sorry she had not known her better. Lily said that maybe they were getting to know her now. Nora turned off the torch. They stood for a moment in the dark of the hidden room, the two of them, with 47 pieces of careful history on the shelves around them, and the mountain outside, and the February cold, and the whole uncertain length of whatever came next, waiting on the other side of the wall. Then Nora reached out and found her daughter's hand in the dark, and held it, and they walked back through the wall into the main room, where the last of the afternoon light was coming through the cabin window at a low angle, and Nora pulled the hidden door close behind them, with the same soft breath it had made when she opened it. And they got their coats and went out to the car. The mountain was very quiet around the clearing. The pines stood in their rows, and the sky had gone to the particular pale color it went in the mountains in February, just before dark, clear and cold and indifferent and completely, entirely beautiful. Lily got in the car. Nora stood outside it for a moment and looked at the cabin. Small and battered and moss-roofed and missing a porch step, sitting in its clearing with the stone chimney rising above it with the authority of something built by someone who understood what they were making. Elena had sat on that porch for 30 years, had walked through that door and climbed that ladder and cooked on that wood stove and maintained her inventory with her precise hand and her genuine understanding of what she had, and had said nothing to anyone, and had left it all to the granddaughter she had not known well enough, and who had not known her well enough, and who was standing in a February clearing, 36 years old, with $31 and a folding cot, and a daughter with old eyes and the right quality of attention. Nora got in the car. She started the engine. She drove down the mountain road through the closing dark, through the pine and the fir and the narrowing strip of sky, and by the time she reached the main highway, she already knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who has found the direction forward, exactly where she was going.